We saw tariffs on the entire world go into play, and then immediately within hours, we saw all of them be paused for 90 days, except on China. There's so much going on. There's U.S. escalations with Iran. The U.S. military is bombing Yemen. We still have the Ukraine conflict, and we also have Russia and Iran speeding up their strategic partnership. Trump melting down in what has been an incredibly hostile first couple of months under his reign. What do you make of all of this, Larry? What do you find to be pertinent right now in terms of where things are going geopolitically? Because it seems quite dangerous.
That's one of those moments where you say, okay, Mrs. Lincoln, other than that thing, how did you like the play? Okay. So some pretty grim things and potentially hopeful things going on. The big problem is that if people are assuming that Trump has sat down, thought through these issues in a critical fashion, asking questions such as, who stands to benefit or lose the most from the tariffs if we impose tariffs on China? Is China going to be hurt worse, or are we going to be hurt worse? If I start military operations in Yemen, do we have the stockpiles of air defense missiles to sustain our presence while also meeting the goals that we have set for ourselves in the Pacific against China? Do we fully comprehend what Russia and Iran's new partnership is in terms of a strategic cooperation? Now, all different issues. And if you're assuming that Trump is is asking pointed questions in each of those categories, he's not. I know that. I can't really say how I know that, other than someone with access. He is reacting emotionally. He's reacting from his gut. And let's just take the example of China. China, as a percentage of its total trade, the U.S. has become less important to China over the last 3 years. It's still, I've seen estimates between 3% of China's total trade and upwards of 9%. By contrast, the United States sends a lot more in trade to China. And China has been selling off U.S. treasuries and buying gold. In other words, things that if they were looking for a solid relationship with the United States, they would be buying treasuries and selling gold, just the opposite. So Trump has set himself up for a trade war that, based on his assumptions, he thinks he can win. But what I come back and say is, look at those assumptions and recognize he can't win. Because I'll close with this one simple example. The U.S. is stepping up its military activities, both trying to support Israel's genocide, still providing support to Ukraine, trying to bomb the stuffing out of the Yemenis, and then also wanting to be ready to go against China. We need missiles, and artillery shells. But I can take you through each of the categories and show you that in all the major, whether they're talking HIMARS or ATACMS, they no longer make those. One of the critical ingredients for the explosives is called antimony. Who produces antimony? That would be China. And between China, there are two alternatives. If we don't get it from China, we can buy it from Iran or from Russia. So if you're calculating from a strategic standpoint, saying, hey, we're going to increase our military activity and we're going to need this critical mineral from China, therefore, let's adopt a policy where we're going to do everything in our power to piss off China. Does that make sense? No.
How is Russia dealing with this, what seems to be Trump's approach now, which is escalate with Iran and also essentially send shockwaves throughout the global economy and a trade war with China. How is Russia dealing with this?
Well, I think it might be losing some of the initial hopes they had for Trump. As you said in the introduction, the amount of trouble he keeps bringing on himself is quite extraordinary. That is, with Ukraine, the fact that he's back at supplying the weapons, intelligence, and all of this, while we learned from New York Times that this war has effectively been an American war run out of Germany. Now, of course, the negotiations aren't going well. They're responding by threatening Russia with sanctions and, again, sending more weapons. And at the same time, he has his ambitions to ethnically cleanse Gaza. He's gone to war against Yemen. The Russians are quite worried about what could happen in Iran. The consequences of going to war in Iran it would be too unpredictable, and the possible chaos would be too great. And now, of course, it's going to take on an economic war with China. It's quite absurd. So I agree with what Larry said. I think when we look at the economic warfare, it's to a large extent it's a competition to manipulate or shift the symmetry of dependence. That is, when you have two countries who are interdependent, you always have one side which is more dependent on the other. So ideally, each country would like for everyone to be dependent on them while they reduce their dependence on others. Now, you can do many things to reduce your dependence. You can have a lot of strategic autonomy, which China does, so that it is very self-sufficient, and you can also diversify your economic partnerships. The problem for Trump is that they don't really have the same strategic autonomy. They're not self-sufficient to this extent, and also they're cutting themselves off from a lot of centers of power in the world. So they're not reducing the ability to diversify. So if you look now at not just China, but the BRICS countries, which, again, Russia's leaning heavily into now, is, they have all the natural resources to do all the mining, the processing. They have all the industrial capabilities. They have their own tech centers. They have a huge market in terms of the population who wants to buy this. They're setting up new financial instruments. So across the board, BRICS can be a very self-sufficient grouping. Why this is so absurd is, again, as Larry suggested, this is the Chinese can diversify away from the US. I don't see the US being able to diversify away from China. Indeed, even the rare earth metal issues, such as antimony, is a key problem. There's not enough of it, and given that China has this and also almost completely dominates on the processing of it, so it's I just don't see how China can be beat in this economic war. And keep in mind that China has more than a tariff weapon. They can begin to dump a lot of the US debts, and they can cause a lot of problems, not just as punitive or punishing action, but indeed because they're fearful. If you think that the adversary will start to seize your funds, steal it like they did with Russia, the Europeans as well, by the way, why would you want to sit on this? I think it was Keynes who argued once, if someone owes you $100, then they have a problem. If they owe you $1 million, then you have a problem because you might not get the money. And I think this is what is concerning the Chinese as well as the Russians. So how do Russia respond? Well, I think we see this now. They don't believe anymore that Trump can deliver on a peace deal, which is largely the Europeans' fault as well. So the Russians are now building up for a massive offensive to, solve things on the battlefield if there's no diplomatic path. So a lot of things are going very wrong at the moment. So having this economic war with China on top of all of these wars, which he promised he wouldn't start, it's just a huge mess. I don't understand what the logic is behind a lot of this.
Sergei Ryabkov, the deputy foreign minister of Russia, recently said that he's seen no indications that the United States is moving to end the Ukraine conflict. When Trump was elected, many people believed he was going to at least rein in some of the wars that Biden had launched essentially on multiple fronts.
I mean, if you could say something good about the U.S. intelligence community, is that they have stood firm for 22 years ago. The Iranian supreme leader said, no nukes, we don't build nukes. And in 2007, 4 years later, the U.S. intelligence community decided unanimously with high confidence that Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon right then, at the end of 2003. And if further proof were needed, that has been reaffirmed every year since, including 2 weeks ago at the annual threat assessment, saying that Khamenei, the supreme leader, has not reauthorized the program that he killed 22 years ago. Well, okay. So Iran is not working on a nuclear weapon. So when Netanyahu and Trump and everybody and his brother and sister say, we're going to make sure that Iran doesn't make a nuclear weapon, what are they trying to do? Okay. Now, the name of the game really is what Netanyahu wanted Trump to do. And that was clear. They met on Monday, okay? Netanyahu wanted Trump to bless, sotto voce if necessary, an attack on Iran. Did he get that? No. What did he get instead? We're going to start direct, says Trump, indirect, say the Iranian, talks on this very issue in Oman on Saturday. What does that mean? Well, who's going to be led? That's going to be led by Witkoff, my personal guy, says Trump. Not Rubio or that guy, Dick Tracy. What is it? Dick Tracy, Hegseth, Dick Tracy head there. No, they're not going to do that. So what's up here? There's room for talks here. I think that somebody got to Trump and said, look, did you know that the Iranians have their own deterrent now? Did you know that they successfully hit many bases in Israel? Did you know, as much as you love Israel, it's going to be destroyed? It's going to be destroyed. You hear that, Mr. Trump? It's going to be destroyed if you start a war, if you let Netanyahu start a war, you help him. What other things? There was there's a wisp in the wind here. There were reports, Reuters carried them 2 days ago, that some of the armed militias, some of the Iranian-supported people in Iraq, many of them, like 8 or 10 of them, said, we're going to hold off. We might even disarm. We don't want to pursue this anymore. Whoa. Is that a kind of an olive branch dished out by the Israelis? I don't know, but it certainly is unique and it can be explained by circumstances. But it seems to me that the Iranians are willing to deal too. The only thing necessary is for Trump to realize, as I think he has, that he's got very, very bad cards, not only on Ukraine, but on the Middle East. And that when Witkoff gets to talk to the Iranians, they're going to say, look, we said indirect. Your president said direct. They're going to be indirect, all right? What do you got? Now, I think Witkoff is going to be smart enough to find out what the Iranians really need, and he'll be on the phone with Trump. I don't know if Rubio or Waltz or that other guy, Hegseth, will be tuned in or not, but that's what's happening, and that's good. That's good because Witkoff has shown himself able to speak for Trump. He may not know much about Iran, and everybody's making a big deal of that. He doesn't have to. All he has to do is deal, and he knows the terms that Trump is willing to settle for. So I see a protracted period now, several weeks at least, of relative less anxiety with respect to whether Trump is going to let himself be sucked in, mousetrapped into supporting Netanyahu in a war that he has lots of reasons to wage against Iran.
With Iran, if it requires military, we're going to have military. Israel will obviously be very much involved in that. He'll be the leader of that. But nobody leads us. We do what we want to do.
Nobody leads us. We do what we want to do.
After he just got through saying, we'll let Israel lead.
Yes.
So he says, so yeah, that's what I said. Trump is all over the board. So let's step back and look, objectively at what's going on. Well, the good news is Trump's only demand, the only thing he said that they wanted out of the negotiations was that Iran can't have a nuke. Iran would go, great, we don't have one. And we got Russia and China to verify that, but we will allow you, the United States, to come in and verify. So basically, Trump's going to go back to accepting the old JCPOA, which he withdrew from. Now, items to be negotiated in that are at what level for peaceful use can Iran enrich uranium? And they're doing that collaboratively with Russia as part of the Strategic Cooperation Agreement that was signed on January 17th. But Iran's coming into these negotiations in a much stronger position based upon the meetings this week in Moscow with the Chinese and the Russians. They're when Iran sits down at the table, it can pull over his shoulder and say, "I'd like you to meet my two brothers, my big brothers." So Iran's not going in there with an empty hand. In the past, Trump has intimated that he was going to demand that Iran cut off all assistance to the Houthis and Hamas and Hezbollah. All of that predicated on the assumption that there's a significant amount of assistance. I would say that's questionable, but let's just go with it that would be one of the U.S. demands. It's not clear that Iran will concede on that, but the alliance that Iran signed with the the Strategic Cooperative Agreement on January 17th, which the Duma ratified this week, now puts that, that's envisioned at least a 20-year deal. And it's extremely important because it covers all aspects of both a military relationship that Russia has with Iran, intelligence relationship, diplomatic relationship, and economic relationship most of all. So the United States, has been pointed out by both Glenn and Ray, Donald Trump's not holding any Trump cards here. In fact, he may be able to come out and declare victory. I think one scenario I hope for is after the meeting, they're going to say, by God, we told those Iranians what the deal was, and they've agreed they're not going to build a nuclear weapon. Well, they'd already agreed not to do that. But Trump gets to take credit for their agreement. He can tout it as a diplomatic success at a time that really I think he's a little hard pressed because what he has, I've been guilty of being crude and vulgar sometime, but last night at that Republican fundraiser, where he said with respect to the 70 nations around the world that are trying to negotiate to not have the tariffs imposed, they're kissing my ass, he said. Now, I guarantee you, at least 80%, if not 100% of those countries that are lining up, as Trump claims, to kiss his ass, are not going out saying, man, let me see if I can buy some chapstick so I can maintain this kind of relationship. I love kissing Trump's ass. I think he has incentivized more countries to figure out how to join BRICS to separate from this kind of U.S. bullying and hegemonic imbecility.
Russia, China, and Iran are really moving into a global leadership role. Larry just mentioned the nuclear talks, which have started before Donald Trump can even meet with the Iranian representatives. So, and this only touches the surface of the cooperation. What do you make of this development, this trend? And it seems like Trump is worsening this. Trump is actually making this process accelerate.
Yeah, well, these are three large giants on the Eurasian continent now. A key logic for Russia and China was that the Russians face NATO, led by the US, on its western borders. China faces the US off its coast on the east, so they kind of had to have their back-to-back as a way of staying safe. Now, it makes sense to pull in Iran to some extent into this. And indeed, you heard this coming from Tehran for a few years now, that their main strategic partnerships should be organized with Moscow and Beijing, as this would allow them to set up alternative economic institutions. Indeed, this is why Iran also has been embraced now with and will gain access to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as well as BRICS. So it also makes sense now for the Russians and the Iranians to do more military cooperation, especially after the way they cooperated in Syria and also Iran's support during the Ukraine war. So they're getting much closer, and it just makes sense in order to have collectively to be able to reduce dependence on the West, but also to build up proper the defense. Now, this being said, it's worth noting that if Trump wants a political or a deal with the Iranians, that Russia could be an important partner, because Russia doesn't really want Iran to have nuclear weapons either, neither does China. So they could be important partners to observe any agreement which is made. But I think the Russians, as well as the Chinese, for that sake, they look at these efforts to renegotiate the JCPOA with the Iranians as being deeply flawed. Keep in mind that what is being asked now of Iran is largely to give up its deterrent. That is, they're arguing because, as both Ray and Larry said, they don't have a nuclear weapon. So what is it that Trump wants? Well, he doesn't want them to be a threshold state, so they have to eliminate their material capabilities. They also want them to reduce their missiles, the distance they can reach. They want them to cut support for Yemen, Hezbollah, Hamas. So effectively to give up its security and hand it over to the United States and Israel, and hope that by subordinating itself that they won't do anything bad to Iran. And this is the main problem. You can't really threaten someone to give up their deterrent, because by threatening them, you only make it clear why they need a deterrent. I mean, this should be common sense. And I think the partnership with China and Russia, it can work both ways. On one hand, if the US decides to increase sanctions or use military force, then they can provide some form of support. But also, if the US wants to make a deal with Iran, it's not in Russia's or China's interest to have to have Iran close down important maritime transportation corridors and shut down effectively the global economy. It's not in their interest. So they can function as a partner for peace, or they can, if the US goes to war against Iran, they would be a partner of Iran instead. So they do have an interesting role in this.